Are we ready?
Devil us
We're ready.
in.
Are we ready?
Hello, I'm Sriram Lakshman, Senior Associate Editor with The Hindu, and I'm here to talk to you about the One Big Beautiful Bill, the landmark fiscal policy legislation that U.S. President Donald Trump signed into law yesterday, Friday, July 4th, America's Independence Day. Now, the bill was very controversial and divisive and polarizing as it made its way through Capitol Hill, the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. The U.S. House of Representatives first signed the bill, and then it was sent to a Senate process, and they passed their version of the bill on Tuesday with Vice President J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote. So it passed 51-50 in the U.S. Senate. It was sent back to the House, and then a reconciliation of the bill was done. So there's a unified version, and that was passed by the House on July 3rd. So Mr. Trump has said that the bill, because it cuts taxes and stimulates the economy, goes the argument, would turn the United States into a rocket ship. During his campaign, he did express the idea that the U.S. government could be funded through tariffs rather than through income tax. House Minority Leader, Democrat Hakeem Jeffries, spoke for about 9 hours against the bill before it was passed. But at the end of the day, the Democrats right now have a minority both in the House and the Senate. They just don't have the numbers to prevent legislation from passing. Mr. Jeffries called the bill a disgusting abomination. Independent Senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, who's the most senior progressive U.S. lawmaker on Capitol Hill, used the phrase morally obscene to describe the bill. Mr. Sanders said, quote, "In America, you do not take food out of the mouths of hungry children so that billionaires can get another tax break," unquote. So through the passage of this bill on Capitol Hill, Donald Trump was often publicly addressing senators and representatives and pressuring them to sign the bill. For example, he posted on his Truth Social platform, MAGA, that's Make America Great Again, his platform, "MAGA is not happy and it's costing you votes," 3 exclamation marks. And basically, one of the threats is the U.S. is going towards a midterm election. There's a midterm election in the fall of 2026. And the threat is people who don't support the bill might get primary. That means that the MAGA part of the Republican Party, which is now controlling the party, would put forth candidates to knock out the candidates who did not support the bill in the primary stage of the election next year. So some members of the Freedom Caucus, which is a group of Republicans in the House, were, for example, opposed to the fact that the Senate version of the bill actually increased the amount of spending. So these are fiscally conservative members of Congress, and they were opposed to the amount of spending in the bill. But there were just 2 Republicans in the House that did not vote for the bill. And generally, there were more holdouts initially, and they were either cajoled by House Speaker Mike Johnson or pressured by Mr. Trump. The fact is, at the end of the day, almost all Republicans pulled together behind this bill, and similarly, all Democrats banded together against the bill. So what are the highlights of the bill? Well, on the spending side, fundamentally, the TCJA 2017, the Tax Cut and Job Acts, which was Trump 1.0's, the Trump administration 1.0's main tax act, there were $4.5 trillion in tax cuts there. These have been extended. They were due to expire at the end of this year. There's been an extension. So effectively, they're going to continue the lower corporate tax rates and the lower income tax rates. There's also been funding for an immigration crackdown and for border security. So more than $50 billion have been allocated towards the construction of new border fortifications. Notably, one of these fortifications will be a border wall with Mexico. $45 billion have been allocated towards detention facilities. $14 billion have been allocated towards deportation operations. And billions of dollars have been allocated to hiring at least 10,000 agents to deal with immigration matters, at least by 2029. There's also been lower local and state taxes. Some Republicans had held out on voting for the bill until this was done. Military expenditure has also been increased. by around $15 trillion over the next decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office. $25 billion have been allocated towards Golden Dome. This is a missile shield over the United States. This was a Trump campaign promise, and $29 billion have been allocated towards shipbuilding. There's also been an end to, for a certain period of time and within limits, an end to taxes on tips and overtime pay. This was another Trump campaign promise. The government debt ceiling has been increased by $5 trillion. So what are some of the spending cuts? So the total expenditure is not matched by the spending cuts, and the spending cuts have not fallen evenly across the income distribution spectrum, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The main and the most controversial spending cuts have been to food assistance, so food stamps, officially called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and also to Medicaid. Medicaid is now healthcare for the poor, healthcare for disabled people. This is going to see over $1 trillion in cuts over the next decade. The SNAP program, the food stamps program, is undergoing the biggest cuts since it was instituted more than 80 years ago. So some of the arguments in favor of making these cuts, so the Republican arguments have been that the systems are prone to abuse, they do not incentivize work. So the criteria for qualification for these benefits has been tightened. And also the amount of benefits received for those who are eligible has decreased. Biden administration tax cuts for clean energy projects are being phased out. For instance, solar energy and wind energy are going to be affected by this. Tax credits for electric cars are also ending. Biden-era tax credit for companies that build other emissions-free power technologies like nuclear reactors, hydroelectric dams, battery storage, etc. These have been allowed to continue for the next decade or so. There's also been greater emphasis on fossil fuels, and the legislation mandates that oil and gas leases must be sold in several areas such as Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. It's also going to cost less to mine on federal lands. Even coal extraction, coal mining got a 2.5% tax break. So this is also in line with some of the Trump campaign promises, which signaled a massive shift away from clean energy and back to more traditional fossil fuels. You might recall the drill baby drill slogan that he used frequently on his campaign. As far as Indian citizens go and residents of India go, and other foreign countries, what's really significant to note is the remittance tax. One point of specific interest to Indians is that the remittance tax, there will be a remittance tax. Now, this has been cut down from the proposed 5% to 1%. That's good news, but it's still 1%, and that's a new tax. And it will affect non-US citizens sending money outside the United States via cash, money orders, or cashier's checks. It applies to green card holders as well, and it certainly applies to H-1B holders. So many Indians sending money from the United States will be affected, as well as those in India receiving money, because India is the top destination for outward remittances from the United States, and the US is Indian residents' top source of remittances. So the Congressional Budget Office, which I mentioned earlier, this is a non-partisan office in the US Congress. It suggests that at least $3.3 trillion will be added to the national debt over the next decade. And it is also, in its initial analysis, said that over 11.8 million Americans will become uninsured by 2034 because of this bill. This analysis is based on the version of the bill that was that was passed initially by the House and sent on to the US Senate. The average, according to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, the average resources available to households would increase between 2026 and 2034 due to this new legislation. However, the distribution of these benefits, the resources that are increasing, there would be differences across the income spectrum. And the crux of the matter is those who belong to the poorest households are actually going to see the amount of resources available to them go down, while those at the middle and at the top of the income distribution spectrum are going to see a marginal increase in their resources. Specifically, the CBO has said that households in the lowest decile of the income distribution would see a decrease in income of $1,600 per year, mainly due to a decrease in in-kind transfers, such as Medicaid and food assistance, which we discussed. Those in the middle of the income distribution spectrum would see their income increase by $500 to $1,000, while the richest decile would see a $12,000 increase over the entire projection period, so over those years. And that's why they've drawn the conclusion that the poor are going to be hit by this bill, while the people in the middle and at the top of the income distribution system are going to gain from this bill. The White House has hit back at the nonpartisan CBO and said it's not factored in the higher growth rate that the economy is going to experience because of the tax cuts, because of the passage of the one big beautiful bill. And so the CBO projections are incorrect, according to the White House. But what is the bigger picture? Well, Donald Trump has delivered on several of his campaign promises on border security, on military spending, on tax cuts. And he's going to use this as his main platform going when he supports Republicans who are facing primary challenges next year. The flip side of that is the passage of the bill is also going to be used by Democrats as their platform going into the midterms next year. Much depends, I think, on how the situation in the economy pans out. See, when we had the elections last year, there were certain macroeconomic numbers that were looking and labor market numbers that were actually looking very good for Biden. But the general sentiment on the street was that people are feeling worse off after the pandemic, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There were supply chain issues across the world and disruptions across the world. There were periods of high inflation that all countries experienced, okay? And the average voter doesn't care about that. They're looking at what their bills are like. Oh my God, I'm paying so much more for groceries. So even if macroeconomic numbers are looking good, if the situation has actually been mitigated and could have been a lot worse, that's not what drives voters to make their choices at polling booths. It's much more, how much am I spending now on my bills relative to a few years ago? And that's the decision that voters are going to make next year. And those who are voting along economic lines, which is a large significant number of voters if you go by data from last year, they're going to look at what's left in their pockets at the end of the day. So much depends on how things pan out for the US economy. It's not just this one bill that's going to determine how voters feel next year. It's also tariffs, and Trump is very active in the tariff arena. And if people are paying more for imports and that's going to affect their disposable income, that's going to have an impact on how they vote next year. Where you are in the income distribution chain is going to determine how you vote when you're thinking about economic criteria next year. So it's too soon to say how this is going to play out, but we can say that the one big beautiful law now is going to be used as a platform both by Republicans and Democrats in the midterms next year. The second big picture that's emerging from this is very much 6 months into the Trump administration. We can see that Donald Trump still has overwhelming power over the Republican Party, over Congress, the Republicans in Congress, and that this is still very much a MAGA party, the Republican Party. It's Donald Trump's party. That's become very evident over the last few weeks. That's it from me today. Thanks for tuning in, and see you again next time.